Ms. Sharma. The voice of the judge, a stern-faced man I knew only as Judge Albright, echoed through the impossibly silent courtroom. He was looking directly at me from the bench, his eyes wide with a look I had never seen directed my way before. Pure, unadulterated awe. The forensic timeline you've constructed is one of the most comprehensive I've ever seen. My own office's digital forensics unit couldn't even get past the first firewall. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral, my hands perfectly steady on the polished table, but my gaze flickered involuntarily to the gallery. There I saw my parents, sitting ramrod straight, their faces identical masks of pure slack-jawed disbelief. In that moment, I knew. It was the first time they had ever truly looked at me and seen a complete stranger. 15 days earlier, the world was a very different kind of chaotic. I stood in the middle of my older sister Priya's apartment, a place that looked as though it had been ravaged by a tornado. Broken furniture, shattered picture frames with smiling faces, clothes torn from hangers. It was a scene of total violation. I was there with my parents and a detective, a weary but professional man named Detective Harding, who was trying to make sense of the mess. My father, Rajesh, a man who believed appearances were far more valuable than the truth, was already deep into his performance. He was painting a picture of his perfect, beloved daughter for the detective, his voice dripping with a false, condescending authority. "Priya is a brand ambassador, detective," he said, gesturing around the ruined room as if it were just a minor, temporary inconvenience. "She has 2 million followers. She was probably just overwhelmed and simply went on a digital detox to some spa in Bali." But I saw the scene differently. My mind doesn't see chaos, it sees patterns. The expensive jewelry box on the dresser was sitting untouched, yet all the network, hardware, the router, the laptop, the backup hard drives, had been surgically removed. "This wasn't random," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "The destruction is a distraction. This was targeted." My father stopped his speech mid-sentence and turned to me. A short, patronizing chuckle escaped his lips as he placed a heavy, familiar hand on my shoulder. That hand felt less like comfort and more like a cage, a warning to know my place. It was the same gesture from 10 years of parent-teacher conferences and awkward family dinners where my accomplishments were brushed aside. "Anya, please," he said, his smile never once reaching his cold eyes. "Don't play detective. You sit at a computer all day. Leave this to the professionals." He looked right past me, directly at Detective Harding when he said it, dismissing my entire existence with a single sentence. I saw the detective watch me flinch, a flicker of pity in his gaze before he professionally turned away. A cold, familiar fury settled deep in my stomach. It wasn't hot and loud, but quiet and heavy, the weight of 1,000 other dismissals just like it. He thought he was protecting his perfect daughter's image. He had no idea he'd just dismissed my entire career in front of the one man who needed to trust me. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the two worlds I lived in, the one my family saw, and the one where I hunt people who disappear. To my family, I had a name. They called me Mouse. It started when I was a kid because I was always quiet, curled up in a corner with a book or, later, a laptop. It was an affectionate nickname, or so they claimed, but it stuck. It became a box, a definition I was never allowed to outgrow. Mouse was small, quiet, and harmless. Mouse didn't make waves. And in my family, making waves was the ultimate sin, a disruption to the perfect picture they so carefully curated. That picture, and the lengths they went to protect it, is at the heart of everything that happened. I remember a family dinner just a few months before Priya went missing. The entire evening was an elaborate ceremony celebrating her latest achievement. My older sister, the family's golden child, had landed a minor sponsorship for a teeth-whitening product. To hear my father tell it, you'd think she had cured a disease. The cork was popped on a bottle of champagne, and my father, Rajesh, a retired sales executive who viewed his children as extensions of his own legacy, raised his glass. He saw Priya as his masterpiece and he polished her constantly, ensuring she gleamed for the world to see. To Priya, he boomed, building her brand, one perfect smile at a time. Everyone cheered. Later, during a lull in the conversation, I tried to share a piece of my own news. I got an award at work last week, I said softly. My mother, Sonia, a woman who believed peace was more important than fairness, gave me a distracted smile. Her entire life was a balancing act, smoothing over my father's sharp edges and ensuring the family narrative never wavered. "Oh, that's lovely, dear," she said, already turning her attention back to the main event. "Another one of your computer awards?" Before I could even explain that it was the Meritorious Civilian Service Medal for my work on a national security project codenamed Nightingale, my father had already steered the conversation back to his favorite topic. "Priya, tell us about the engagement analytics on your latest post." I felt that old, familiar feeling. A quiet shutting down, an internal retreat. It wasn't just this one moment. It was the science fair project they missed, the graduation I paid for myself, the emergency appendix surgery where they showed up 3 hours late. It was a lifetime of being a footnote in my own family's story. But Mouse was a name that only existed within the 4 walls of my family home. In my other world, I had a different name. That world was a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. It's a place designed to be the exact opposite of a home. There are no family photos, no warm colors. There is only the hum of servers, the cold bite of the air conditioning, and the silent, focused intensity of people for whom a single mistake could have catastrophic consequences. In that world, I wasn't the mouse. I was the lead analyst. My voice was the one that cut through the tension during a live operation, calm and authoritative. I remember tracking a foreign cybercriminal syndicate, their digital footprint a ghost on the web. "The target is using a multi-hop VPN through 3 non-extradition countries," I said, my eyes scanning a dozen monitors at once. "I want a full packet capture analysis. We need to crack his dead man's switch protocol before he can wipe the servers." My superior, Director Evans, a no-nonsense official who relied on me implicitly, just nodded from behind me. "Do it." In that world, nobody ever asked me about social media analytics. They only asked for my analysis, for my conclusions. They didn't call me Mouse. They called me by my operational call sign, Ghost. Ghost was invisible by choice, a phantom in the machine who could see everything. She wasn't overlooked, she was feared. Which brings me back to the police station, just moments after my father had patted me on the shoulder and told me to leave the investigation to the professionals. The sting of that public humiliation was still fresh when my mother pulled me into a quiet hallway. Her face was a mask of strained concern, but her eyes were hard with purpose. "Anya, listen to me," she whispered, her hand gripping my arm. "You know how your father is. He's just trying to control the story so Priya's career isn't ruined by all this. Please, don't make this harder by questioning the police. It makes us look bad." I stared at her, and in that moment, the last bit of childish hope I held on to finally dissolved. My sister was missing, potentially in grave danger, and my mother's primary concern was public relations. She wasn't protecting her daughter, she was protecting the brand. The justification I had heard my entire life, "That's just how your father is," suddenly sounded utterly monstrous. For years, I let them define me. I kept my world separate to keep the peace. But Priya was missing, and my parents' narrative wasn't just insulting, it was actively endangering her. They only respected procedure when it benefited them. It was time to introduce them to mine. I left the police station with a chilling clarity. The official investigation was going nowhere, circling the drain of the perfect story my parents had fabricated, the story of a happy girl on a wellness retreat. They weren't just grieving parents. They were active obstacles. My goal, I realized, had to shift. I couldn't just find Priya. First, I had to systematically prove that the official narrative was a lie. My family had built a wall of fiction around my sister, and I was the only one with the tools to tear it down, piece by methodical piece. The next day, I approached Detective Harding. I didn't come to him as Anya Sharma, the worried little sister. I presented myself as a cooperating civilian with a specific skill set. "I need you to file an emergency subpoena for my sister's complete digital footprint," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. He started to give me a patient, rehearsed line about privacy laws, but I cut him off. Not just her social media. I need full cloud backups including all metadata and deleted fragments, telco tower triangulation, logs, not just GPS pings, and all rideshare API call histories for the last 30 days. He stopped, his pen hovering over his notepad. The skepticism in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of something else. Respect. He wasn't looking at a mouse anymore. The data started to flow in, not to my personal laptop, but to a secure terminal inside a government facility. Here, surrounded by the quiet hum of servers, I was finally in my element. I left the emotional chaos of my family behind and entered a world of pure, cold fact. I began building what we call a pattern of life analysis, the same process I'd use for a high-value target, and a new picture of my sister began to emerge, one my parents would never have acknowledged. Priya wasn't at a spa. She was trapped, leading a secret life, being systematically blackmailed by a dangerous ex-partner. The digital timeline I constructed proved my parents had lied about the last time they spoke to her and where she was supposed to be. But it also pointed to something else, a dead zone. A final data ping from her apartment, then absolute silence. I knew there was something physical there. Back in her ransacked room, I ignored the obvious mess and ran my hands along the closet wall, feeling for an inconsistency. Behind a false panel, my fingers found it. A small burner phone and a panic device. This was the rustle from the closet. This was the breadcrumb she'd left behind, hoping someone like me would find it. It was the final, damning piece of evidence. My father thought procedure was about filling out forms. I was about to teach him that real procedure is about building an unbreakable chain of evidence. The subpoena was approved. The hearing was set. They walked into that courtroom thinking they were the victims. They had no idea they were the subjects of my investigation. The family court hearing room was suffocatingly beige, a place designed to neutralize high emotion. My parents, Rajesh and Sonia, sat with their lawyer, radiating an aura of profound impatience. They believed this was a simple formality, a tedious legal step to get a court order to unfreeze my sister Priya's accounts. I could hear them whispering loudly, the sound sharp in the quiet room. My father was annoyed that I had dragged them into this mess, and my mother was nodding, her expression one of weary martyrdom. They looked at me not as a concerned sister, but as an incompetent child who had complicated their lives. They had no idea they were about to be judged. When the judge gave me the floor, I walked to the podium. The only sound was the steady click of my heels on the linoleum. I didn't look at my parents. I didn't look at their lawyer. I looked at the judge and at the massive screen to my right. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. I felt nothing. It was the calm that comes when you've already accepted the worst, and all that's left is to execute the plan. I spoke like I was delivering a briefing at the Pentagon. No emotion, no inflection, just a relentless cascade of facts. At 2,200 hours on October 10th, I began. As the digital timeline illuminated, the screen, the time Mr. and Mrs. Sharma claimed to be on a video call with Priya, her primary device pinged 3 kilometers from their location. Her burner phone, however, pinged at a storage facility in the industrial district. I didn't need to look at them to feel their confusion turning to horror. The whispers stopped. I continued, my voice a monotone instrument of truth. I walked the court through the evidence trail I had built in the dark, the one that exposed their carefully constructed lies. I showed the financial transfers from Priya's accounts to an untraceable crypto wallet. I displayed the threatening messages I had restored from the burner phone's memory, messages filled with a terror my parents had refused to see. I laid out the travel logs that showed Priya was being systematically isolated, her movements controlled, her life shrinking until it was just a single desperate breadcrumb left in a closet. With every new slide, I was dismantling not just their story, but their entire worldview. Then, I presented my final slide. It was a complex network map, showing the blackmailer's entire digital infrastructure. The individual blackmailing Priya is her ex-boyfriend, I stated. He has been using a sophisticated spoofing network to mask his location. However, he failed to account for the metadata embedded in a single audio file he sent. I hit a key, and a short, distorted voice filled the courtroom, a voice promising violence. That's when their lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! This is absurd. This is amateur sleuthing from a data entry clerk. On what authority does she present this wild speculation as evidence?" The room went completely silent. The judge didn't look at the lawyer. He didn't look at me. He looked at the back of the room. "Detective Harding?" Detective Harding stood up, his presence filling the space. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and official. "Ms. Sharma has been working as a formal consultant on this case from the beginning. She is the lead analyst for the Department of Defense's Cyber Command Task Force 7. He paused, letting the words sink in. "Her operational call sign is Ghost. Her analysis is, as we speak, being used to secure a federal warrant for an active rescue operation. Cyber Command." The words hit my father like a physical blow. This was a world he knew from the news, a world of silent, serious power he deeply respected. He stared at me, his quiet daughter, his mouse, and for the first time he was seeing the ghost. He was seeing a high-level government operative. I watched as decades of condescension and dismissiveness crumbled in a single, silent moment. His posture changed. He involuntarily straightened his back, a lifetime of casual dominance replaced by a flicker of raw, undiluted fear. The judge's gavel came down with a crack that made him jump. "Based on this evidence, I am issuing a gag order on Mr. and Mrs. Sharma, and formally citing them for the obstruction of a police investigation." For my entire life, my father had been the loudest person in every room. But in a room where facts were the only things that mattered, he was finally rendered speechless. The call came while I was still in the courthouse, the judge's words still hanging in the air. It was Detective Harding. "We have her," he said, his voice strained but steady. "She's safe. She's alive." I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. A single, silent breath I didn't even know I was holding finally escaped me. It was the feeling of a massive weight being lifted, not from my shoulders but from somewhere deeper inside my bones. The work was done. The truth had been honored, and my sister was safe. That was the only victory that mattered. At the hospital, the scene was surreal. My parents were there, standing in the hallway, barred from entering Priya's room by a uniformed officer. It wasn't done out of malice, it was simply procedure. They were persons of interest in an obstruction case. For the first time, the rules they'd always thought were for other people, for lesser people, applied to them. They weren't important figures managing a crisis. They were just two bystanders, watching through a small glass window in the door. Inside that room, I sat by Priya's bedside. She was pale and shaken, but her eyes were clear. She held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "They never would have listened," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "They wouldn't have believed me. But you saw me." In that moment, I was the center of my family's world, but the family I had always known was broken beyond repair. As I left her room later, I walked past a quiet assembly of my true peers, Detective Harding and 2 federal agents. They didn't say much. They just nodded. It was a simple gesture, but it was filled with a profound, unqualified respect that felt more like family than anything I had ever known. 6 months later, I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling glass wall that overlooked the city. This was my new office. The world outside was a sprawling network of data, of connections, of threats. It was a landscape I understood. On the door behind me, a simple placard read, "Anya Sharma, Unit Chief, Digital Threat Analysis." I wasn't just an analyst anymore. I was leading a team of young, brilliant minds who looked to me for guidance, for direction. The respect in their eyes wasn't something I had to fight for or explain. It was earned every single day through competence. This was my real family now, one forged in the quiet, sterile hum of servers and the shared pressure of our mission. There were no golden children here, no black sheep. There was only the work and the mutual trust that we would all do our part. I was in the middle of a briefing one afternoon, outlining a new threat vector, when an email notification popped up on the corner of my monitor. The subject line was just my name, Anya. My finger hovered over the mouse. It was from my father. I clicked it open, my expression unreadable. The message was short, the words of a man completely adrift. "Priya's therapist says we need to go through you to talk to her," he wrote. I don't understand any of this. "We are sorry." I read the words over and over. "We are sorry." How many times had I silently begged to hear that? For every forgotten birthday, for every dismissed achievement, for every time I was made to feel small. But now, seeing the words on the screen, I felt nothing. No anger. No triumph. Just a quiet, final sense of distance. His apology wasn't for me, it was for the loss of his control. He still didn't understand. But I finally did. I moved the cursor over the message. I didn't type a reply. I didn't even hesitate. I just clicked archive. The message disappeared, sent to a digital folder where it would sit, unread forever. I turned back to my team, who were waiting patiently. I pointed to a complex data map on the screen and took a breath, the air in my new world feeling clean and light. "Okay," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Let's get to work." My family thought a legacy was the story you tell the world. I learned a true legacy is built on the facts you can prove, especially to yourself. If you've ever had to become your own hero because no one else would see you, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.